Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Clean Water Casting, brought to you by Florida Right to cleanwater.org. We are the organization that is sponsoring a Right to Clean and Healthy Waters constitutional amendment for the 2026 ballot. And this is a series of podcasts in which we talk to water quality experts throughout the state. And we are very happy to have with us today Codty Pierce, our Calusa Waterkeeper down here in Southwest Florida. Codty is a lifelong resident of the Caloosahatchee watershed. Growing up along one of its many tributaries helped shape his passion, love, and admiration for the area's history and biodiversity. His early background in reptiles, wetland restoration, and native plant landscaping, coupled with a career as a professional fishing guide, has created a unique collage of in-the-field experience across local uplands, wetlands, estuaries, and nearshore Gulf waters. His mission is to restore the Caloosahatchee River from Lake Okeechobee to our coastal waters. Codty, thank you very much for being here with us today.
Good morning, Joe. It's a pleasure to see you again. I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Right. So, lifelong resident, you grew up down here. What was the Caloosahatchee like and the rest of the watershed when you were a kid?
Yeah. Well, I'm going on 35 trips around the sun now, which is a short duration when we look at the vast timeline that this area has played a role in one culture or civilization's chapters. So, looking back when I was a kid, as to water quality conditions in the Caloosahatchee River, some of the things that are most notable for me is that we really didn't have the level of Lake O discharges that we're experiencing today. Obviously, we didn't have anywhere near the amount of population density inside of Lee County. So even though the river shores were developed, that took place in the early 20th century, there wasn't a lot of river traffic. I think the biggest thing that happened on a biweekly basis is when the FP&L barge came from, the Gulf of Mexico, made its
Mhm.
long trek all the way up the river to the power plant. But things were quiet. We didn't really have as many of these issues with algae blooms at the time. Again, going back to the fact that we really didn't have, high discharge amounts coming out of the lake. Things were pretty quiet and kind of podunk, I would say. There was definitely a lot more wildlife at the time. There was a lot less noise as well, from vehicle traffic, planes, all these things that have increased now that we have a larger population at hand here.
So, recently, reading in our local paper of record, the News Press, you said that we are a first world country with third world water quality problems. So, here in Lee County, what are the water quality issues that concern you the most and you most want citizens to know about and to understand?
Absolutely. So yes, I did make that claim inside of the news press a couple of days ago. It's one that I state because I want people to think. I want them to acknowledge, that we have some serious issues going on inside of our watershed. And if I have to narrow down what are my primary concerns as far as water impairment here inside of Lee County, I think its nutrient loading is probably one of the biggest things that I need to address. Nutrient loading comes in the form of excess fertilizers that are inside of a lawn that ends up in the watershed. It can come from our pets' fecal matter ending up inside of the watershed, but it also comes from us, from our septic tanks in the form of overflows, leaks. It can come from infrastructure such as lift stations that are inundated with storm surge, could come from broken infrastructure as far as sewer pipes. But this nutrient loading that is adding to the system, more or less, it's throwing gas on the fire, is one of the biggest things that I have to address here inside of our coastal community. As you know, there's been a long standing or a long understanding that we've had an immense amount of nutrient loading that comes out of Lake Okeechobee. And that is something that we definitely like to continuously address. If you look at our BMAPs, our Basin Management Action Plan updates that are on a 5-year basis, around 80% of our total nitrogen loading for the Caloosahatchee River is still coming from the lake and its tributaries itself. The reason that I like to address some of these coastal issues is because even though the majority of the loading is coming inland, which is a little bit outside of our control, this excess nutrients that we're adding to the system at the end of the pipe here at the mouth of the river is definitely exacerbating some of the water quality concerns that we see on a routine basis. So, with that being said, the amount of nitrogen, whether it's organic or inorganic, is contributing to increased amounts of algae. So any of the folks that have visited Matlacha Pass within the last 5 to 6 years have definitely noticed an increase in the amount of algae activity inside of Matlacha Pass, both from filamentous and also from Dapis algae. Unfortunately, those algae are able to metabolize the nitrogen much quicker than a lot of the other more advanced plants and animals that call that place home. So as a result, we are seeing single cellular organisms like these algae becoming the dominant species. So it's impacting us from a cultural aspect. It's impacting us from a water quality standpoint. It impacts us, from the commercial aspect of fishing charters, birding, kayaking, folks that are coming here specifically to, embrace our wild ecosystem that we have. So the nutrient thing is at the top of my list at all times. It's something that I like to inform people that there are ways that we can limit our impact, and there are also some harder conversations that we need to have as a community, especially as we start to look towards the future on sustainability. What does the next century of Lee County look like for folks, and how are we going to ensure that we can still be here and we can still be productive and have a thriving community that so much of us call home?
So I moved down here in 2016 to learn that everybody was fighting for clean water down here. After doing some research, it seems that we have been fighting these issues for quite a while now, in some cases for
Yeah,
decades. How
yeah.
come these problems are so prominent? How come they haven't already been dealt with? Why aren't they solved by now?
Yeah, well, those are very important questions. I think I have the answer to some of it, maybe not all of it,
Hmm.
but I think it starts with a good self-reflection as to what Southwest Florida is. What was Southwest Florida from its inception? It's an attraction for tourism. We have been in a population deficit up until the beginning of the 21st century. So Florida has been lucrative. We have always been attracting people from outside of this state to come to Florida, invest in Florida, spend your time here recreating. So being a service-based industry or service-based community, we have appealed to that. We do things like wetland destructions. We bring in lots of attractions, large-scale developments. We attract an immense amount of people all to this area that start to compound and utilize and sometimes over abuse what resources we have. So the question on 10, 15, 20 years of this issue, how come it's not solved? Part of it is because it's very complex. We have the loading aspect from the ditches and canals. So as more development comes into place, we need areas for these people. So we see, a state entity that starts to make it easier and easier to develop critical habitats such as wetlands that starts to displace our water issue. So we get really good at the ditches and canals aspect, which is speeding up the traveling and direction of water to get it off the land into the watershed. That water is therefore a much better avenue for transporting nutrients to our coastal communities than ever before. So the more development that comes on into play, the more of a loading aspect is definitely applying, because anything that happens on land, unfortunately, will likely end up inside of the water system. Now, we can go a couple of steps further than that. Unfortunately, because of some of our elected officials in the past 10 to 15 years, we've seen somewhat of a steady decline in environmental protections, environmental standards on which we protect our most important natural resource, not only for us tree hugger folks, but this applies to everyone that is in the state. If we talk about real estate, service, tourism, everything that we have to offer is all tied to this natural resource, but at the same time, we're expediting the amount of progress in the form of construction and progress that Lee County has unfortunately become known for. In addition to that, we're battling climate change. The unruly word climate change. You can't say climate change. Well, unfortunately, folks, it's at our doorstep. Now
Hmm.
that we're experiencing higher than normal Gulf levels, we also get higher amounts of precipitation, which is putting an immense amount of strain on what infrastructure that we have here. And I think that these things, unfortunately, are compounding much faster than what we can do coming together to get on the same page to start addressing these things. Florida is definitely moving in the direction of instant gratification, rather than a long-term approach at looking at, sustainability and reducing our carbon footprint that is here, not only in the form of carbon, but also in the form of, our waste, both from a fecal matter standpoint and also excess inorganic nitrogens. And I think, that's just touching on a couple of them, but really, I think it's mostly going to have to come back to the politics aspect, unfortunately. Politics are not my forte. It's not something that I enjoy, but, we have a tremendous amount of, higher ups that are not listening to the people. And I think that we also have to do a better job of educating our community that is here. Since we are made up kind of like a smorgasbord or a melting pot of so many different areas of the country. We have, New England, we have the upper Midwest, we have some folks from the West Coast. You have such a combination of people here. It's what makes this community really unique, but at the same time, it is challenging at times to be able to navigate some of these social standards in order to get a universal understanding, and also appreciation for the longstanding environmental quality of life that we've known. When someone shows up here yesterday or a year ago or 10 years ago, their idea of what water quality is, what the standards are, is probably a much different understanding than some of us that have lived here for our entire lives, or some of the professionals that do this for a full-time job. People may know that, hey, there's an algae issue, or we read about this in the paper, or the red tide is getting bad. But until you have that reflection standpoint to see just how much this amazing place has started to decline, it's harder to get this across the board, so that way we can work on a common goal of reaching restoration, or at least managing a sustainable trend forward without a steady decline.
So you think there's an underappreciation by the public of the severity of our water quality problems?
I would, I don't know about an underappreciation. I think it's that they just don't know. I don't know that I would say an underappreciation. I think it's probably a lack of understanding. And it may not be their fault. There
Hmm.
are many facets to what makes Southwest Florida unique. I'm a fisherman, so I can relate a lot of this to the coastal community. I can see it from a water quality standpoint, the catch rates that I've seen over the years. I talk to commercial fishermen, so we talk to stone crab folks, grouper fishermen, snapper fishermen, those that are still catching mullet for the commercial supply. All in all, unfortunately, we are seeing decreases in the amount of catch, whether it's measured in tons, or in my opinion, what I see and observe on a daily basis when I was guiding full time. Absolutely, we are seeing a decline in population, at least of native species.
Wow. So, Calusa Waterkeeper as an organization, what does it do to combat our water quality issues?
Yeah. So Calusa Waterkeeper is a non-for-profit. We are a 501(c)(3), which is fancy wording for we work for the community. We are made up of community members, primarily volunteers. We are dedicated to the restoration and protection of the Caloosahatchee River from Lake Okeechobee all the way out to our coastal areas, so our barrier islands. Now, being mostly a grassroots endeavor, we focus heavily on citizen science. So we do routine water sampling. We look at fecal indicator bacteria, which is a sign of impairment for nitrogen. We also are heavy in advocacy and policy. So from the advocacy standpoint, we try to take the extra effort to educate the public. We try to get them engaged. And at the same time, in some ways, we are a watchdog group for environmental infractions, or when we see, dire consequences like what we've seen in the last couple of years as far as eutrophication of some of our systems and a steady decline from, lots of contributing sources to that are starting to conflict with our water quality standards. So the way that Calusa Waterkeeper can take on some of these, again, is utilizing our volunteers. Without our volunteer and community support, we would not be able to do anything. but we really try to take the extra steps to educate folks. We provide educational training seminars, we do tabling events, as well as some in the field type opportunities. Some folks have heard of our vertical oyster garden project. We utilize natural resources, trying to continue this trend of improving our water quality standards that are here. At the same time, going back to that watchdog mention as of earlier, we try to do citizen science surveys of critical habitats like our seagrass. So we try to have a wide variety of offerings to the public. We try to have a wide overview of managing and taking statistics on what we're seeing as far as ecological changes, and then also trying to be a good community member, that we are collaborating and communicating with different entities across not only the county, but Southwest Florida as a whole.
So I believe that you have water rangers, volunteer testers, who are testing waters that the state does not test. I guess that's expressly why you're testing them. What sort of waters are we talking about?
Absolutely. So the state of Florida, through the Florida Department of Health, conducts what's known as the Florida Healthy Beach Program. They do biweekly sampling of our coastal beaches. They are testing for indicator bacteria of enterococci, which is the bacteria that we measure inside of a saline environment to measure for potential human contributions of nitrogen to the system. So underneath the FDOH rule, they are looking at swimming and bathing sites. For instance, areas like the Sailing Club beach that's on the new 41 bridge in the Caloosahatchee River, the old Cape Coral Yacht Club swimming beach, and then obviously all of our beaches that are along the coastal area. Those are done by FDOH on the biweekly basis. So Calusa Waterkeeper is trying to fill the gap for areas that we know that the community is interacting with the water, coming in contact with the water on a routine basis. So this can come in the form of kayak launches. There are areas that we know that people fish and recreate where they're interacting with the water. There are areas that families are recreating, whether it's skiing, boating, obviously canoeing and kayaking. But we're really trying to bridge the gap on areas that have been overlooked, where, again, the community is interacting with the water, where they have the chances to unfortunately come into contact with a potential human health concern. So that's where Calusa Waterkeeper is filling the gap, and we are utilizing our resources to provide that information to the public so they can make sound judgments on how they'd like to conduct their activities and where they actually do that.
Super important work. You guys have a lot on your plate. And Coastal Waterkeeper as an organization has been a staunch supporter of the proposed Right to Clean and Healthy Waters constitutional amendment pretty much since we got started. Can you tell us why? How does it advance your mission?
Yeah. I can give you two answers. I can give you my own personal, response to that with the hat off, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll do that one first. I
Okay,
believe the
please.
right to clean water, as me, Codty Pierce, is one of the last chances we have to really get the opportunity to speak for those and those things that cannot speak for themselves. This is the one fundamental right that we as citizens here can ensure that we're going to have these environmental resources moving forward. We've already seen the changes that have happened firsthand to our community, to our beloved areas that we like to recreate and spend time in. We want accountability, so that way we can speak up for these locations and for the plants and animals that we, so dearly love. The right to clean water is, I think, our last hope in being able to secure that type of protection that is needed for these key areas. We have seen multiple times, bigger, what do I call this, bigger factions that come into play, that can kind of bully a lot of these community members. And I think that the right to clean water is the one standing that we have for a better tomorrow. Now, with the Calusa Waterkeeper hat on, I back up a lot of what I just said, but the right to clean water is, one of the movements that helps drive CWK forward. These are the type of endeavors that we want to ensure that we have a clean, healthy ecosystem moving forward. And if you look at our mission statement, which is the restoration and protection of the Caloosahatchee River, Lake Okeechobee, and our coastal islands, the right to clean water is the most direct avenue for us to achieve that goal moving forward.
Cody, both with your CWK hat on and off, thank you very much for being with us today. We greatly appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Joe. As always, we appreciate you. We appreciate what you're doing, and thank you for the opportunity to support you guys.
Everybody, to all our listeners, thanks for being with us today, and we hope to catch you on the next episode of Clean Water Casting. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.